it now, right? Okay, all right. So after about 2 or more days in the lab, as I was saying, the zygote is transferred into the woman's uterus, where at this point, there's nothing more that the doctors can do, right? So the doctors have they've kind of fertilized the egg by the sperm in the dish, then they put it into a woman's uterus. This is where, at that point, the implanted zygote is supposed to attach to the uterine wall, and it's supposed to grow. All the doctors can do is put this zygote into a woman's uterus. After that, it's like God has to take control. And so one thing I wanted to, and we don't have so much time, but I wanted to hear our thoughts in this room about assisted reproductive technologies or alternative reproductive technologies, and what we think about that, and how, as ministers of God, you would advise your members. You know, this is, I know we don't like to think about negative situations, but this is an issue that is very real to many people. And they do consult their pastors and things like that about this particular issue. So what is it that you would advise? It's a very difficult topic, I believe, to discuss, actually.
Yeah, praise the Lord.
Hallelujah.
Actually, as you know, I believe God is the author of knowledge. God has given the scientists, the knowledge to come up with this type of, because not every woman womb can carry a baby. So if they can do something like this, because I was looking at this lady, she was like now by 30 years old or something like that, she was able to, like, the type of the act that was used for her to, for her to be able to give birth. So to me, it's just like a blessing of God, because so many people went before the incoming of this advanced technology. Some people, they were unable to give birth, and since it has been able to help so many people. I don't know the number, but it has been able to help. So to me, it's a blessing of God, so, it's not a cause, Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for your input. How about others?
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, sir.
Like in this part of the world, West Africa,
Yes, sir.
especially in Nigeria, some people don't believe, even some churches don't believe in it. Like some churches that says wearing a ring is you're going to hell, all those. Some people don't believe in it at all. So it's very difficult to convince some people to do it. And secondly, it's very, very, very costly here. I heard that's about 2 million naira or some people that have not had what to feed very well. Now I advise them to go and do IVF of 2 million. It's not. So the belief system and the financial issue. Because there are some people, a lot of people that may be married for 15 years, 20 years, have not given birth. They have not considered doing such because it's so costly here. That's my own contribution, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your contribution.
Hello, ma'am.
Good evening, ma'am.
I'm listening, and it sounds more like infertility is more so on the female and not so much on the male. So what if the situation is it's the man who has no sperm and it's not so much the female? Wouldn't I would be interested in infertility, and even if I had a problem, because some female have endometriosis, some have PCOS, some female womb is kind of tilted and a little bit different. So that should mean you can't get a baby because you weren't born fertile like a number of females.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for your contribution. We know that the first infant that was born through this assisted reproductive technologies was born in 1978. And now more than hundreds of thousands of procedures are conducted in the United States. And again, I know about what is happening in the United States, and they have resulted in, they result in more than 45,000 live births. So it's something that people are doing, even in the United States. It's quite expensive. I think individuals are paying about $20,000 for one go. And maybe that go has 3 chances. After those 3 chances, that's it. You pay another 20,000 for that. So it is very expensive in Nigeria and in the United States as well. I just wanted to know what we as, the body of Christ in our church believes about it, because it's something that's very real and something that people are considering. People are considering it. People that can afford it are considering this type of situation. But that's all I'll say about that for now. As we talk about, I'd like to talk about the phases of pregnancy. I remember that I told you that we would talk about these 3 stages of pregnancy. The first one is what we consider, or what we call the zygote or germinal stage. This is the time period from about conception to 2 weeks of age. Once the sperm and the egg unite, this fertilized egg is what we call the zygote. That's what I told you, that they, the fertilized egg, they do that with IVF, they do that in a dish, and then they insert that into the womb of the woman, or the uterus of the woman. I remember that I have a friend who did this procedure, and she told me that when she did that procedure, when the doctor implanted, or when the doctor transferred that zygote to her uterus, the doctor said, now we sit and we wait for a miracle, because there's nothing else we can do. So, even if people say that people are trying to play God, at some point there's a limit to where science can take us. And then we all we have is God. All we can depend on is God. So here we have this fertilized egg called the zygote. This is constituting the first period of prenatal development. The period of the zygote, again, is about the first 2 weeks of life. So after about 12 hours after fertilization, the zygote, one part, will now divide into 2 equal parts. These parts divide into 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then so on. Over 38 weeks, that period of pregnancy, that zygote that was so small becomes a newborn baby that possesses trillions of cells. Now, if the cells, that zygote, if it was to separate into 2 groups instead of staying together, this would result in identical twins. We know that fraternal twins, though, come when 2 eggs are released from the ovary into the fallopian tube, and both of those eggs are fertilized. So they come from 2 different eggs, 2 different sperm. The identical twins will come if those cells divide or separate into 2 groups instead of staying together. That results in what we know as identical twins. So I talked about this rapid cell division that occurs within 12 hours of conception. At about the 4th day after conception, the cells are arranging into this hollow sphere. This hollow sphere is what is called the blastocyst. The blastocyst is this hollow sphere, and it has a bulge of cells on one side. And this bulge of cells on one side is what we call the inner cell mass. The inner cell mass. So the cells are arranging into this hollow sphere, which is called the blastocyst, with this inner cell mass on one side. The zygote, that thing that I told you that forms, is so tiny that about 100 to 200 zygotes placed side by side would only measure about 1 inch. And about 5 million of these things would be about 1 ounce. would weigh about 1 ounce. So you can imagine that is very tiny. Again, this zygote is gradually penetrating the blood vessels in the wall of the uterus. And then what happens is, so this is what I was talking about, where you put it in to the woman's uterus during IVF. Now it has to form a relationship. Once that zygote penetrates the blood vessels in the wall of the uterus, it eventually will form a dependent relationship where that zygote is dependent on the mother. This is what we call implantation. That implantation is what I said, that there's nothing that science can do about it. It either happens or it doesn't because of God. So once this zygote penetrates the blood vessels in the wall of the uterus, eventually forms a dependent, where it is dependent on the mother. It implants into the mom. This begins the second period of conception, or of prenatal development, rather. This is the second period of prenatal development, which is what we call the embryonic period, or the period of the embryo. And when we think about the period of the embryo, we know that is the 3rd to the 8th week of development. And there are 4 main processes that underlie this transformation from zygote into an embryo and then a fetus. The first one is what we call cell division. We talked about that in the last slide. So this rapid division of cells. The second one is what we call cell migration. Cell migration is where the movement of these newly formed cells where they began to somewhere else. The movement of these newly formed cells where they began in the embryo to somewhere else. The third process is called cell differentiation. Cell differentiation. This is when the cells have divided in that cell division, they start to differentiate. They start to become different from one another. This means that initially all of the cells are equal. They don't have any fixed function. But after a while, they start differentiating. They start being different from one another, and then they have their own separate function. This is this idea of cell differentiation. The last one is this idea of cell death or apoptosis. This is just selective death of certain cells when they're no longer needed. We have trillions of cells, right? But all of those cells aren't needed. They go through this process of cell death or apoptosis. By the end of the embryonic period, or this second period of prenatal development, the face and the features are delineated. What that means is that we can see the face shape, the fingers, the toes, even the external genitalia, all of that is present by the end of this period. So some people say, oh, it's not a baby until later. The baby has formed by the end of this 8th week. The baby's face, now it might not look like, definitely does not look like ours. The proportion of the body is very different from ours. The head is way larger than the rest of the body, but the eyes, the face, the facial features are very delineated. They have fingers, they have toes, they have external genitalia. You can tell if it is a boy or if it is a girl at this point. At 6 weeks, the embryo looks like a human being, but the head is almost as large as the rest of the body. So the proportion is not, it's kind of strange, the proportion, because the head is so big, the rest of the body is not as big. But you also see the heart, the liver functioning at the end of this period as well. So the heart has started to develop and grow. The liver has started to develop and grow. One of the things we know about this period too is that many miscarriages, many spontaneous abortions occur during this period. So women have to be very careful at this point. And a lot of times they might not even realize that they're pregnant during this 3rd to 8th week of prenatal development. As we continue in talking about early development, we know that there are these 3 structures that develop and protect life in the uterus. During the period of the embryo, there are these three structures that develop and protect life in the uterus. The first one is the placenta. Once the placenta forms, it gives off this hormone. The hormone is HCG hormone. And that hormone is what signals the woman's ovaries that she's pregnant. So what happens is when they take the test, the urine test to find out if a person is pregnant, that's what the test is detecting in the woman's urine, is this HCG hormone. And this HCG hormone can be detected in a woman's urine within a few days after a missed period. You have the placenta. Let me see if okay, so our placenta, and I'll talk about the other things in a second. The placenta is this network of blood vessels. It's an organ that allows the exchange of materials carried in the bloodstream of the fetus and the mother. This is the organ that allows the exchange of nutrients, essentially from mom to baby. It helps to sustain the life of the fetus. That's the placenta. The umbilical cord contains blood vessels, and it connects mother to child. It's a tube, again, that has blood vessels that run from the placenta to the fetus. It carries oxygen, it carries nutrients to the baby as well. The amniotic sac is this sac that contains amniotic fluid. This is this clear, watery liquid that the embryo floats in. The embryo is floating in this fluid, and this fluid serves as protection for the embryo. It serves as protection against physical shock, against temperature change. That's the amniotic sac. That's what it holds. This is our face development, and we talked about how the features are delineated. So it doesn't look exactly like us, right? But you can tell the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and you see how big the head is in proportion to the rest of the body. This is 5.5 to about 8.5 weeks, face development. Then the third and final period of prenatal development, or the third month through the 9th week, or the third month or the 9th week through birth. This is the longest period when we're thinking about those 3 periods that I mentioned. This is what we call the fetal period, 9th week to birth. Yes, it's amazing. It's actually amazing when you think about all the things that occur, and then you just really remember how great God is that he can create something like this. Anyway, the third and final period of prenatal development, again, is the fetus, 9th week to birth. This period has so much rapid growth. There's so much going on. You see that the development of the central nervous system continues at a rapid pace during the time. The development of the brain is a major accomplishment of this period, even though we know that some parts of the nervous system, some parts of the brain continue to develop even several years after birth. In fact, I always like to tell individuals who work with adolescents that there's a part of their brain that is still developing even through adolescence. And that part of their brain is that part that is involved, or that is in charge of their risk-taking behaviors. So sometimes we just think teenagers, why do they do things that are just so strange? Why do they take so many risks? Really, biologically, there's something still developing in their brain, even up until adolescence, that hasn't fully developed. And that's responsible for their risky behavior. So we really have to guide adolescents. We can't just say, oh, you're grown now, you should know this. They actually are still developing even through adolescence. So again, some parts of the nervous system continue to develop many, many years after birth. Now, I'd like to talk about fetal behavior. What is happening with the fetus? What is the fetus experiencing? We know that by the end of the 3rd month, the fetus has all of its body parts, but it just weighs about 1 ounce. very tiny, but it has all of its body parts. By the end of the 4th month, usually mothers are reporting that they feel the fetus moving, they feel kicks. At 5 months, you start noticing, or you may not notice, but the fetus is having some reflexes. The fetus is sucking, hiccuping, swallowing. So if you notice, like on sonogram or pictures of the baby, you'll see the baby maybe sucking its thumb. You see all of these things occurring at the end of, or by about 5 months. By the end of 5 months, that fetus that was so tiny is about 12 inches long, and it weighs about 1 pound. Another thing that's very interesting is that some research has shown that there is prenatal to postnatal continuity. Prenatal to postnatal continuity. That means that the movement, the activity that you notice in the fetus prenatally is usually the same activity that you notice when the baby is born. So you think about, for moms who have had babies, think about how active your baby was. If you can remember back, think about how active your baby was in utero. And then compare that to when your baby was an infant. What they're saying is that it is, sometimes it matches, that the babies that were very active in utero end up being the very active infants, and the ones that are very calm end up being the very calm infants. That's what we call prenatal to postnatal continuity. At about 10 weeks, the fetus is making breathing movements. The fetus is making breathing movement. So its chest wall is moving in and out. What's happening here? The chest wall of the fetus is moving in and out. There's no air that's being taken in from the fetus, but just small amounts of fluid, that amniotic fluid, are being pulled into the lungs of the fetus and then being expelled. Those small amounts of amniotic fluid are being pulled into the lungs and then expelled. What we know about fetal breathing is that that breathing only happens about 50% of the time. Unlike with us, we are breathing 100% of the time, right? With the fetus, that's only happening about 50% of the time. Now, if an infant is born prematurely at 6 months, the regulatory processes, the nervous, respiratory system usually are not mature enough for survival without intensive intervention. So at about 6 months, if an infant is born, their processes, like their nervous, their respiratory systems, are usually not mature enough for survival without intensive intervention. So they can survive, but they're usually in the hospital. They usually have intensive intervention, because at this time, the fetus is not able to produce this liquid that allows the lungs to transmit oxygen from the air to the blood. So at that time, at 6 months, the infants can't produce an adequate amount of this liquid that lets their lungs transmit air or oxygen from the air to the blood. And without that liquid, the infant is not able to breathe properly, so they need intensive intervention. Now, we call 22 to 28 weeks of pregnancy this period of viability. So if a baby is born between 20, so we think about this period as about 40 weeks of pregnancy, right? If the infant is born between 28 weeks, well, between 22 and 28 weeks, that is the point at which the baby will usually, survival is possible. The baby will be fine. So for women who they're trying to make sure that they get to a certain point before they deliver their baby, usually it's about that 27-week period or that 28-week period where they know that the baby has better chances of survival, but the baby still needs help breathing. All of this stuff we know, though, what we know is that God, no matter what, God's will be done, right? So no matter how, how long the baby is able to stay or not stay, God has the final say. Let's think about fetal experience. What is happening? Sorry. the fetus is experiencing a lot of stimulation. There's lots going on, even though it's in utero, even though it's in a woman's stomach, there's a lot of stimulation that's happening to that baby. One of the things we know is that there's not much sight. There's not much sight at all in utero. Touch, there's a lot of touch. So the baby is making contact with parts of its body. It's grabbing its umbilical cord. The baby is rubbing his or her face. The baby is sucking his or her thumb. There's a lot going on there with touch. We know as far as smell is concerned, the smell of that amniotic fluid takes on the odor from what the mother eats. So doctors will report that if a woman has just had coffee and she's about to deliver, that they can smell the coffee in her fluid, or they can smell things that are very strong like curry. So the amniotic fluid has the odor of what the mom ate. And we know that the baby is able to perceive these smells as well. The baby is also able to detect flavors in the fluid because the baby is swallowing the amniotic fluid. What they know based on research is that the fetus has a sweet tooth. Baby prefers the sweet taste. The baby likes those sweet tastes. And then hearing, what we know about the fetus is that it responds to sounds, even from at least 6 months, the baby in utero is responding to sound. So that's why people say you should read to your baby, read the Bible, sing to your baby, sing worship songs, sing praise songs. The baby is able to hear all of these things. What they've done is they've inserted these mini devices, these mini recording devices in the uterus right before birth. And those recording devices show that the sounds that are originating outside of the womb are audible inside of the womb. So what's going on outside of the womb is able to be heard inside of the womb. So people talking, the baby can hear. The baby hears the mother's heartbeat. The baby hears the mom swallowing, hears the mom breathing, hears all of those things. And responds to these things from at least 6 months of pregnancy. The baby responds to these sounds. The noises, what research has shown is that the noises that happen outside of utero elicit changes in the child's movement, in the child's heart rate. The fetus's heart rate even changes when they hear their mother speaking. The fetus's heart rate goes up. So you know that they are hearing these things. They're recognizing the mom speaking. They're recognizing people around them speaking. When we think about, and I talked about all of this. So I said there's grasping, there's sucking, there's rubbing, bumping the walls of uterus. The fluid takes on the odor of what the mom has eaten. The fetus is swallowing amniotic fluid, has a sweet tooth, sight, not so much sight, and then hearing. The fetus can hear the mother's heartbeat, the mother's breathing, hears mom's voice, hears people talking to her, and reacts to those things. And how we know that the fetus reacts is that you notice a change in their heartbeat and you notice a change in their movement as well. Now, there are some hazards that I like to talk about to prenatal development. About 45% or more pregnancies end in what we call miscarriage, or what is also known scientifically as spontaneous abortion. What we know about a lot of the miscarried fetuses is that they had several defects anyway, so they would have made it really hard for further development to occur, even if they weren't miscarried. 90% of fetuses that survive the danger of miscarriage are born normal. You know that. But what are the hazards to prenatal development? What we call teratogens. These are any agents from the environment that can cause harm to the developing fetus. Anything that occurs before birth that may cause harm to a fetus is what is known as a teratogen. There are many agents, there are many types of teratogens that can cause harm. They include prescription drugs, non-prescription medications, also environmental toxins as well, environmental pollutants. What we know about these teratogens or these agents is that they usually cause damage during sensitive periods. So a factor in the effect of these teratogens is timing. Many of these things only cause damage at a sensitive period of development. So each major organ in the child's body has its own sensitive period or has its own time where it's growing. And if there's some kind of disruption to the organ during that time of growth, then that's when you would notice some sort of issue. There was a drug that they gave women in the 1960s called thalidomide. And they gave women this drug, pregnant women, this drug when they were throwing up so much. The women would use it as a sedative to help them sleep, and then they would use it to stop throwing up as much, to deal with morning sickness. What they realized about this drug is that women were giving birth to babies that didn't have arms, or they had, flipper-like hands growing out of their shoulders. The babies had major birth defects. And they noticed that this defect only happened if the woman took the drug between the 4th and 6th week after conception. That's because the 4th and 6th week, or 4th through 6th week after conception, is the time when the limbs of the baby are growing. That was a sensitive period for that particular organ. And so if the baby were to, or if the woman were to take that drug before that time or after that time, they noticed that they didn't have any negative effects, only during that sensitive period. So that's an example of this sensitive period issue. Unfortunately, a lot of these occur even before the woman might realize that she's pregnant. The length of the exposure are critical factors, so that many of these negative agents show what we call a dose-response relation. Dose-response relation. That means the greater the exposure, the more likely damage will occur. So the greater the exposure to some potential teratogen, the more likely that some kind of damage will occur. That is the dose-response relation. I know I'm going pretty fast. I just want to cover this so you have enough time to take your exam. We know that this early period of development, the embryonic period, seems to be one of the early periods. The embryonic period seems to be the most sensitive period of prenatal development. So there's lots of development occurring during that time. It's important to avoid a lot of these teratogens. There are many of them. Illegal drugs we talked about, maternal smoking, drinking, PCBs. This is what is found in some fish, some types of fish, lead pollution, automobile emissions. All of those things are dangerous. So we know that almost all illegal drugs are dangerous for fetal development. Newborns and older infants of women who were born when the women were born and the women were addicted to drugs end up having so many problems that we know that illegal drugs are horrible for babies. Nicotine, alcohol, smoking, drinking, all of those are just as dangerous as illegal drugs. So we always advise individuals. We already advise individuals to stay off of those things anyway, but especially during pregnancy. And when a woman drinks, for instance, the alcohol in her blood crosses the placenta into the fetus's blood. So that's horrible. And there's no safe amounts of alcohol that a woman can drink. The PCBs that are found in some types of fish, if those things are ingested by the mother, they can lead to smaller than average head size for infants. So women who are pregnant are advised to stay away from certain types of fish, because that may lead to slightly lower IQ scores for their children. Lead pollution, auto emissions, all of those can lead to severe problems for the baby later on. even where a woman works, depending on where she works, if she's exposed to all of the pollution, chemicals, all of that can be negative for her child's development. There are maternal factors that are related to a child's health. Those include age, nutrition, disease, and stress. Pregnancy is most likely to result in a healthy baby if the mom is between the ages of 16 to 34. Remember, this is just research. Of course, we know that there are other factors. There's God, number one. But just according to research, a pregnancy is most likely to result in a healthy baby if the mother is between the ages of 16 to 34 years of age. According to research, older moms may be at risk for children with Down syndrome. Younger moms are also at risk for kids that have inadequate diet, or the mothers may have inadequate diet. They may be less likely to get prenatal care if they're younger. We know that the fetus is 100% dependent on the mother for nutrition. So malnourished newborns have smaller brain cells than well-nourished babies. Malnourished meaning that the mother was malnourished while she was pregnant. We know that malnutrition early in prenatal development may also lead to physical defects for the child. So it's important that the mom is very well nourished. Different diseases transmitted to the baby can also be negative for the baby's development. Also, stress. A woman who is experiencing stress while pregnant may have a child who is at high risk of emotional problems, behavioral problems. So the woman also needs to make sure that she is not stressed. It has been found to be related to lower birth weight. So mothers who are stressed tend to have babies who are smaller, and also impaired functioning of their babies if they have stress. So stress is definitely not good for the babies. That's what I wanted to go over. I said a handful, but that is what I wanted to cover with you. Do we have any questions, any comments, any feedback before I give you a small break and then allow you to take the final? Anything that I've covered that you'd like me to go over again?
Ma, I would like to make a comment on the drug during pregnancy.
Yes, ma'am.
While at work, there was this 6-week-old baby boy. The baby was uncontrollable. He had
I'm
an
so sorry,
attitude
ma'am. I'm
at
having a
6
hard time
weeks.
hearing you, ma'am. I'm so sorry. Is it just me?
You're not
Or
hearing me? You're not hearing me?
I can hear you. It's
Hold
just breaking
on.
up. Can everybody
It's
else
breaking
hear?
up. Oh,
She's breaking up.
Okay,
I
thank you,
don't
ma'am.
know.
Okay,
Oh
you can
dear.
try, ma'am. You can try now. I think it's a little better.
You're hearing me quite well now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. While at work, there was this 6-week-old baby boy admitted, and he was uncontrollable, meaning no matter how we feed him or we wrap him up, we tried to keep him comfortable. He was always crying. He was just irritable, and he fussed about it. At 6 weeks, we could pick up his character that he is a fussy child. And we were wondering what could really be causing that. And it's more than one child since working there that I've noticed, but that particular one hit me. When the mother came in the following day, we realized that the mother smoked a lot of marijuana.
Wow.
And yeah, we found out that during pregnancy, she never stopped. She did smoke marijuana during pregnancy. So the child now has an attitude as, very miserable and hard to control at 6 weeks already.
Wow. And so you see how bad, even though the baby is so young, see what the mother's choices have caused for the baby. It's terrible. Thank you, ma'am, for that feedback.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
This is Florence. My
Good evening,
question is
ma'am.
on the 3 period. So I just want to get it clear. You said the period could be divided into 3: the
Yes, ma'am.
conception, the embryo period, and the prenatal development. Is that it?
No, so the periods are the period of the zygote. That's the first one. The
Okay.
zygote or the germinal period. That's one.
Yes,
Period
ma'am.
1. The second period is the embryonic period or the period of the embryo.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the third period is the period of the fetus or the fetal period. And we said that that first period, that germinal or the zygote period is about 2 weeks long. So conception to 2 weeks. The second period is about 3 to 8 weeks, 3 to week 8. So the third week to the 8th week. And then that last period of the fetus is from 9th week to delivery, which is the longest period.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for asking.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, I just want to add that the period between 22 to 28 weeks,
Yes, ma'am.
that survival is possible.
Yes, ma'am.
And in the developing countries where there are no, enough equipment to maintain these babies at this time.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
not that there are always a lot of deaths if they were born at that time, even
Yes,
though survival is possible. So I think maybe you are referring to the United States.
Yes, ma'am. I was saying that survival is possible, but intense intervention, meaning that you have to have the equipment to be able to support that. Without that equipment, less intervention at 22 to 28 weeks. By then, the baby has almost fully formed. Now the baby just needs to grow and get bigger. Before that time, definitely all of the equipment is necessary. If they don't have that equipment, then you know your rates of survival are going to be lower in developing countries, ma'am. Yes, you're very right. Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions, thoughts, ideas? Okay, so why don't we have almost about 15-minute break, and then we will resume at 6 o'clock our time, my time rather, 6 o'clock my time. Right now it's 5:47. We'll resume at 6 o'clock my time, and then we will start our exam, which is open note.